Right. Well, thank you again for joining us here for our Troubleshooting Tuesdays. And as I mentioned, Maddie, if you can keep hold of the chat here and kind of point things out as questions come in. And I do encourage this. If you have a question regarding a certain slide, feel free to put it in the chat. We are going to be having a good Q&A session after we get through the presentation. So if you feel that your question can hold, write it down so that we can address that afterwards, so you don't forget it. But if it's something relevant to a point we are discussing, throw that in the chat and we will answer that as we go. And we are going to be using the chat, encouraging you guys to share a few things as we go through our presentation here. But as we said, Troubleshooting Tuesdays, and today we're covering volunteer management. So, as I mentioned a little bit ago, volunteers really are the heart and soul of any event. No matter the size and scale, no matter what the topic you're covering, volunteers are there giving of themselves, right? They are taking time out of their schedule, their personal lives to come in because they care about an event. And so treating them, right, as such really goes a long way when it comes to volunteer management and getting repeat volunteers, which is the goal, right? You want to be able to have people come back. That helps build relationships. It builds community, right? You are able to, it helps with training going forward, right? Once a volunteer becomes familiar with things, then you are able to rely on them more going forward. So keep that in mind as we go through some of these slides here. So as we get started here, I want you to to just take a moment and pause. Think about your favorite volunteer or a favorite volunteer event or what you think a good volunteer should be. So take a moment and in the chat, can you just throw out a couple of ideas of just like some words, like some descriptive terms as you think about your favorite volunteer or what you think a good volunteer should be. And Maddie, if you can read some of those out as they come through here for us. So yeah, just take a quick second, throw out a couple of terms for us. Anything coming through?
Yeah, so we have active, friendly, engaged, punctual, enthusiastic, friendly, values the festival.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are topics. And as I was kind of brainstorming some of these, some similar words popped up as well. The first one I'm thinking of is someone who follows through, right? Someone if you ask them to do something, because you as staff, you're going to be busy. You're going to be running around the event, trying to keep, putting out small fires or keeping things organized. And volunteers, you rely on your volunteers. So somebody who says that they're going to do something, they're going to follow through with it. You know it's going to get done. That's just one less thing off of your mental checklist here, right? Dependable, right? Absolutely. Someone said that. Someone is dependable. They show up on time. They get things done. You can trust them. They are dependable. Showing up, right? Not just like if they volunteer, show up on time, but they are going to be there, and not just like physically, but mentally and emotionally. They show up for you. They are fully present. They are fully invested, right? Those are the ones that you really start to build deep relationships with that come back year after year. Proactive. That was something that we've really come to rely on with our volunteers, right? That they don't have to come to you for every single small little thing. Like, hey, we're out of water bottles. They come up to you and they ask you, we're out of water. Okay, instead of bothering you with that, right? They run out because you train them. They know where the water is kept and they keep it stocked up. They don't have to come up to you like, hey, we're out of this, we're out of that. They know where it is. They're proactive. They kind of foresee the needs. Like if they say, hey, we're running low, then they can contact you and say, hey, we're running low on this. Then you know when things need to be stocked up again, right? Enthusiastic. They're there with a smile. They're there because they want to be there. They're engaged in the actual feel and the values of your event, of whatever is happening here. They're excited to be there, and enthusiastic is contagious, right? If they're happy and they're ready to be there, that passes on amongst the staff, the other volunteers, and your event guests that come in. and engaged. They're here, they're 100% mentally checked in. They know what it is that they're talking about. You know, as Jane was mentioning, she's like, hey, I've been here a long time. I know what happens in DC. I know this event backwards and forwards, right? She knows, you know, where her talents lie, and she's engaged in that. That's the type of volunteer that we think about if we think of someone, right, who shows up for us regularly, or the type of person we are looking for. So, thinking about these things and thinking about some of your volunteers, how do you feel about them? Right? Here is a volunteer. You know what, like as Jane was saying, the gold standard of volunteer management is, but when we talk about the gold star standard of a volunteer, how do you feel about some of the volunteers that are coming in, and what and how can we describe them? Right? Are you feeling they're kind of neutral, they're okay, right? Yeah, this is the kind of volunteers that show up, or are like, oh, they're pretty good. They're pretty good, right? There are some things that we need some improvement on, right? Or they're amazing. Oh my gosh, this whole event, like we can't run it without them. They show up year after year. They know everything that goes on. They are just rock stars, right? And that's kind of what we're aiming for, right? When it comes to our volunteers. Now, we can't do that, right, with just one volunteer for an event. What we are looking for is a team of volunteers that are rock star volunteers. They're engaged, they're enthusiastic. So how do we build a team like this? And with your volunteers that you have, right, what kind of training can be offered so that they feel prepared to do these jobs that they are volunteering, they're showing up for, right? What kind of training can you offer them to get everyone to the level that we really need them to be at, and that they feel that they're bringing value to an event, right? And that's really what it is. It is a partnership here between you and them to get people enthusiastic about coming to your event and being fully engaged, uh, fully there, so that they feel that, one, they're not just giving something, but they're receiving something in return, right? And that's kind of what volunteerism really boils down to, is that partnership between the two. It is mutually beneficial. So, how do we get there? And what are the challenges that are preventing you from getting there, right? So when you think of your volunteers, what are some of the challenges that have come up for you, right? With getting people to just come to your event, right? Or to be fully engaged volunteers. And feel free to put this in the chat. What kind of challenges are you facing when it comes to volunteer management? And Maddie, as they come in, go ahead and read those out loud, please. And we're going to take just a minute here, so feel free, write out some challenges that have come up with your volunteer engagement, right?
Commitment.
Commitment, okay, yeah.
No show, definitely. We've all dealt with that.
Anything else popping up here?
Mm-mm.
All right, so some,
Sorry, struggle finding them.
ah, all right, all
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Oh, all right, so here are some of the challenges that we have frequently found ourselves facing, right? And Jane, as one of our lead volunteers, I'm sure has really dealt with many of these things. But burnout, volunteer burnout is a real thing, right? Whether it's because they've come back year after year and they're just burnt out with volunteering in general, or perhaps the day is just a long day, right? And they just get burnt out after the day, whether it's because of the heat, because a lot of events do happen in the summer, with such as festivals. It gets hot, right? They're tired. They get burnt out during the day. Perhaps, their role they've been assigned to is really difficult to do in the heat. Or maybe they're just burnt out in general because of everything going on in their life, and they just can't commit to anything else at this moment. Or perhaps it's just keeping volunteers engaged during the day with their roles, right? Perhaps it's just a tedious role and they get bored with it, right? Keeping volunteers engaged can be tricky, right? Perhaps, they're just, distracted on their phones if you have teens coming in, right? Or, they're just, they're not understanding the role that a volunteer needs to be playing, and they're not fully engaged in their duties and they might be wandering around. Perhaps they've shown up, but they haven't gone to their assigned station. We have dealt with that ourselves, right? Um, Perhaps it's you have a couple of volunteers, but you would like your volunteers to be inviting other volunteers, right? To kind of help with that outreach network. Perhaps they're like, oh, I just don't think my friends and family would be interested in this, or they just don't think about it. They might just sign up on a whim and not bring others with them. This is kind of where the crux of outreach can happen, right? Is through having those who are already volunteering for your event to bring others with them. Or perhaps, as you guys have said, it's just getting volunteers in general. Where are they hiding? Where can we find them? Right? Where are those people that can really become your rock star team that come in and just help everything run smoothly? These are challenges we have faced, and we're going to cover some of these things, right? Be able to kind of hopefully address these challenges head on so that you don't have them, or when they do show up, it's not crippling the event. So now you're going to hear a lot of common excuses, right, that people are going to give to you as to why they are not going to show up or why they're not interested in volunteering. Please put some of them in the chat, right? What excuses are you hearing when you try to invite others to come volunteer at your event or when you're doing outreach? Because we hear them all, right? We hear everything. So feel free, put those thoughts in the chat. What are some of these common excuses? Or perhaps they're not so common. Maybe you've had just some crazy, crazy answers that have been given to you. They're like, I have no idea how this even came up, but okay. Because we've heard it all.
Too busy.
Busy. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Any others? Yeah. Yeah. No time, right? That's a big one. I just don't have time for that right now. Right? This isn't something that I can just fit into my schedule. Too busy, right? It's a very common thread here, right? Right. Here we go. Too busy with work or whatever it is. I just don't have time for that. My schedule is packed, right? Or I'm already overcommitted right now. That's not something I can make time for. Or, a common one, which is actually very, very understandable, right, is I have a scheduling conflict that day. That's not something I can really do. Sorry, I'm already busy. Or I have family commitments right now, right? And that's understandable too. Everyone has excuses, and that's fine, right? But a lot of this does boil down to I'm just too busy, right? And that kind of focuses down on some of our outreach that we're going to discuss, right? About making things a priority. So there are four major factors affecting a person's decision to volunteer. And this is kind of how we're going to break it down. So as we go through our presentation today, after we get through that, we're going to have a panel discussion here with Maddie and Jane and myself as we go through some more questions, and then we're going to have our Q&A. But four major factors affecting a decision to volunteer. Number one, the time commitment, right? Time is a big thing, and volunteers, they can't be committing, you know, a large chunks of time. A lot of people can't. So that's not something they can, logistically do, realistically handle. Or enjoyable. Is this something that they feel that they're enjoying while they're doing it, right? Are they bored, or is, the type of volunteer roles you have, are they not engaging enough? Perhaps there's a conflict between, a volunteer and that organization that happens. How do we get through that? And is there an alignment of values between your volunteers and the event that you are producing? And so we're going to cover all these topics in more detail to explain further. So time commitments. So what we've done and what we have found that has worked for our Smithsonian event, and I have found with other events that I've run, is we kind of break it down, right? We have our larger roles and what we kind of call micro roles, right? So a larger role is something that is either like a full day commitment or multiple day commitments, right? And what we have here is like committees, perhaps a board member, for your event, and what we call lead volunteers. And Jane has been a lead volunteer with us for several years, and she's going to be sharing here in a little bit later on more about what it means to be a lead volunteer and why she has come back. But a lead volunteer is somebody that we bring on for um, full day commitment for every day of our festival, and they help lead volunteers in separate subcategories that we divide out into. And we're going to go into this further on in more detail. And then we have micro roles, and this is what we do is we break it down into shifts, right? So there's shifts during the day, and depending on how long your event lasts, you can kind of choose the time block here. Typically, what we have done with our Smithsonian Festival is because it's full day, we break it down into about 4 hour shifts, right? Like you have your morning shift and then your afternoon shift. And then if you have an evening shift, you can tack that on too. And what we have done and what I have found that has worked is rather with those shifts, we do about like 30-minute overlap so you don't have a mass exodus of volunteers and no one around as the new shift shows up. And that kind of allows some staggering to happen. So as you're thinking about this and thinking of your event, right? Having shifts really helps people to be able to, okay, I can't do a full day event, but I can come for a couple of hours, right? And that's typically where you're going to get people once they kind of have that taste of it, then maybe going forward, like, hey, I had a really good time. I could probably commit to a day or I could commit to a weekend, right? And that's really as you start to build, right, your core volunteer group going forward, and you can continue to have repeat volunteers that come back year after year. Because asking someone who has not been to your organization or to your event, your festival or whatever that is, to commit to a full day thing is a lot to ask, especially if they're not familiar with it. So starting out with some shifts, and those roles look like greeters, tickets or like information booth, as Jane has talked about, helping to come maybe like before your event to set up or at the end to help take things down, right? Or perhaps they're working with artists in the tents or whatever that is. But you can break those down into shifts, and that really works well going forward. And however you want to organize that is really up to what you are producing, what you are putting out. And this is where my grandmother would kind of say, use the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid, right? And so where we're able to, or we want to be a little bit softer, keep it simple, silly, as I've told my kids, right? But you don't want to overcomplicate things, right? So you don't need to be doing multiple shifts for multiple roles. If they're different shifts, just have everything be like a blanket thing. Like if your event starts at 10, volunteers show up at 9, right? For the morning shift. And then you can kind of go into the afternoon, depending on how long you want your shift to be. Have that 30-minute overlap and then have the end time, and then if you need an evening shift for cleanup, that's fine. But don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, and that helps keep everything standardized, and people are happy as they go forward. So do we have any questions about this? Anything that has popped up in the chat yet? Okay. And remember, feel free to pop questions in the chat as they come up. Next, enjoyable. And this, Jane really talked about this as she was doing her introduction. And Jane, if you have any thoughts here, feel free to pop them in, right? But making sure your volunteers feel taken care of, right? That is core. As your volunteers really are the heart and soul of your event, right? They keep things running. They need to feel that they're not being taken advantage of. And there are some simple things that can really help with this. Feeding them, right? Even the little snacks, it really helps. Providing water, providing granola bars, for our Smithsonian Festival, if someone works a full day shift, they work the morning and the afternoon shift, we provide meal vouchers, right? So that they can go and they are able to get a lunch or whatever kind of food that they're wanting, right? So that they feel that they are being taken care of. And then what we've also done is no matter like if they work even one shift or two shift, every volunteer got like a free ice cream, right? That it was a small thing. I know that does add in, you have to plan for that budget wise, but if you're not able to do that, that's fine. But you can provide some type of snack, right? To be able to make sure that they feel that, they were taken care of. It's the small things that really matter. Allowing them to work with a friend, right? Through our application process, when our volunteers fill out just a brief online application, they have the ability, like in a comment box to say, hey, I would like to be partnered with so and so, right? So that, like, especially like your maybe teen volunteers that come in, they want to be with a friend, right? They want to be with their friends, or perhaps it's a parent wanting to volunteer with their child, right? Or a married couple, right? Like no matter what, or perhaps it's coworkers. They want to be with someone that they know, that they enjoy with, it makes it fun, right? They have these shared experiences, shared memories by interacting with people, and they're able to chat throughout. And that helps with the engagement because sometimes, a volunteer, if they don't feel they know anyone and they're put in a role that is maybe a little bit farther removed, right? Then and they're by themselves, that's not going to be fun. Right. They need to be able to feel engaged. They need to feel that they have some camaraderie there with them that is able to help them just feel that connection to the event. And they're having good memories that are building upon that. Also, give them a variety of tasks, right? If it's something like, ticket taker, that's fine. Perhaps they're there for a little bit and then they want to switch to a different role. That's okay, depending on what type of roles you have for your volunteers, right? But giving them a variety of things to do, or perhaps, someone comes in and relieves them and then you send them off to do something else. That's fine too. Now, we have some dedicated volunteers that every single time they volunteer, they're like, I have to be in this specific area. They have claimed ownership over these opportunities at the festival, right? Because they do this every year and it's important to them. I'm like, absolutely. We make sure that they are able to get shifts there in those areas that they absolutely love, and again, they have that year's experience. They know how to work things. They know how it runs efficiently. And a lot of times when you have new staff that come in with your events, right, they may have only been there for a short time. And you have volunteers that have been there a lot longer. And sometimes there can be some headbutting, but not really. Most of our volunteers, they understand that, things change year after year depending on our theme, right? Or what staff is in charge or what that guest artist or that guest chef is doing, but they're there because they care, right? So allowing them to do things that they're engaged with and giving them a variety of jobs is super helpful. And on that, don't ask them to do something that ties into their normal day-to-day job. Like if someone, is an accountant by profession, they might not want to be a ticket taker. They might want to do something totally out of their wheelhouse. And that's fine. You want them to be engaged, right? You want them to learn something new, to experience something. Now, sometimes you might have a volunteer who, right, say like we had one recently. She was like, hey, I'm a language specialist, right, who works with this event with this Indigenous group. And I would really like to use my skills. So can I be partnered with this artist at this tent? And we were like, absolutely, absolutely. If that's what you want to do, we're okay with that. And that really worked out because our festival this past summer, Indigenous Voices, we had some people that Spanish was their native language, right? And so she's like, hey, I have experience working with these types of groups. So that's where we assigned her. And she loved it. And they had a great time and she was able to network and build connections there. So it really depends on your volunteer, right? So having, if you are doing an application process or a questionnaire, having questions down like that, like are there any skills or experiences that you were bringing with you that would be helpful in a volunteer role? You can ask that question and volunteers will put that down, right? But sometimes, like I said, they may be, in a different job, like, hey, I really want to work the gardens. You could put them in the gardens, or I really want to work the family area. You could put them in the family area, right? But in being able to give them something that they are being entertained in is incredibly helpful. And that brings us down to our last point here, which is recognition. Are your volunteers being recognized for their efforts? This is crucial. Crucial, crucial, crucial. And this goes beyond a pat on the back, right? It goes beyond a pat on the back, right? With our festival, we have provided festival t-shirts, right? That every volunteer should be getting a t-shirt. And actually our repeat volunteers, especially if they're coming for multiple days, they will wear shirts from past years, right? But it still marks them as a volunteer. And they are so committed. They want their volunteer t-shirts. But with that, we also recognize our volunteers. Every year we have a couple of orientations, but our general orientation for all volunteers coming in, we have a quick little award ceremony where we give out pins, based off of the number of years that they have been with us, they've come back to volunteer. And we have had this past, correct me if I'm wrong, Maddie, this past year we had someone who had been with the festival, was it 36 years at this point? I mean, it was a long time, and he was one of our most long-standing volunteer. But we give out pins and we call out their names and they're handed out. And that was something that when COVID hit, our festival director, the first thing that popped out of her mouth was, what about our volunteers and their pins? Because this is something that was important to us, our volunteer recognition, right? And to kind of have that break was really difficult because the festival that year was online, and so we weren't able to have volunteers, and so we didn't want to count that against them, right? So we didn't. We just tacked it on for when we went back to in person, but allowing them to feel special, allowing them to feel that, you value their work, you value their commitment. And not everyone can really afford, like to give handing out like super expensive pins, but even something small, right? Something small that they are able to build up to, right? Really helps them feel valued, helps them feel special. We've taken time out of an orientation training to recognize volunteers by name for the number of years that they have committed to being with us. That goes a long, long way when people are giving their time and their talents to come in, to do an unpaid job, to be able to be there. And so we making sure that you are recognizing your volunteers. That's incredibly important. All right.
You do have a question.
Yes, please.
So, with teens who may bring a friend and work with them, any tips on keeping them focused on the job together? And how do you enable a good balance between fun and focus?
That's a great, great question. As I formulate this, Jane, do you have any thoughts, having been a lead volunteer?
I was worried about that. The teenagers, goofing off or disappearing during the day. And that hasn't been my experience. Like you said earlier, let the two people, work together. And I personally love the teenagers because I don't have any children for myself. And I love meeting them, where they're from, where they go to school, and what they're interested in. And I find these kids fascinating. So I really like them. And I also give them my cell phone. So if they need to contact me, if they don't understand what's going on or they're going to be late or something, they can contact me right away. And I haven't had anybody disappear. I did have somebody a couple of years ago who, if the festival is slow and we say, take turns, go and visit some of the tents and see, performance or something, and just come back in 15 minutes. Well, this particular person came back 35 minutes later, and I said, what happened to you? And she said, I got so swept up and it was so cool, this performance, I just lost track, and I was just in a total another world, and I apologize, and I thought it was so funny, but I haven't had that problem. I really haven't.
Yeah, I will point out here that you want your volunteers to have, right, a good experience. And sometimes taking a break is fine. Absolutely, they're going to go to the bathroom. They're going to take breaks. Now, as I've mentioned a few times, we're going to get into our, the role of like a lead volunteer going forward. But I will just point out that when it comes to minor volunteers, because as we have organized volunteer roles by groups or categories, right? Like opportunities, we call them, whether it's like information booth or it's Oh goodness, working in like the food waste kitchen area, or perhaps you're working with the artists, so each area has a lead volunteer over those volunteers in that area, right? And so every morning of our festival, we give a printout of names and contact information of all the volunteers in that area to the leads so that they are able to contact them if they're running late or like they're lost or something like that. But also we find that when they are paired with a friend, there is a little bit of accountability, and typically we're like, okay, make sure you're back by this time, right? If, keeping them focused, because we offer trainings and we go over what needs to happen specifically, and then the leads are there to reiterate, right, what happens specifically, what the jobs are, and because they have a volunteer t-shirt, right? Honestly, they're committed. If a teen has volunteered to come into your event and they show up, typically there is some commitment. Also, what we do, that we just started this past year, and I'll go over this in outreach more, but we started offering volunteer service credit hours through their schools, right? So we sign off paperwork, which means they know, right, that they are being, they're getting credit for this through their schools, or if they're going for like some volunteer award through like a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout or the Presidential Volunteer Award, right? They know that they have to be held accountable, right? And so those minors that usually show up is because they are responsible. Um, Now, that being said, with like a minor, right, you're not going to put them in charge of something that is critical, something that is age appropriate that a minor can do, right? That's not going to, break the event, right? We can kind of laugh about that a bit, but making sure that it is something that, that is they're able to handle. That being said, though, we have a great story of an amazing minor volunteer who has been given a lot of responsibility because she has proved herself, right, to be responsible. We had a volunteer last year who signed up, and she was put on our sustainability, which is like, going around and keeping the festival site clean, right, with trash pickup and recycling and things like that. We had a shortage with our accessibility area. We needed some extra volunteers there that where they were helping to set up like sighted guide tours for those who had visual impairment. And she was pulled in a little bit just to be an extra body in a tent to answer questions. But when the need came up that they needed a sighted guide tour, she's like, I'm willing to help with that. She got trained on the spot, led the tour herself, came back this year as like a rock star volunteer, and was working the accessibility area in an area completely by herself this year because she was proactive, right? And actually, our accessibility coordinator specifically requested her, make sure she shows up again this year. So we called her in person before the festival. Volunteer announcement went out, like, are you coming back this year? And she's like, yes, I'm happy to come back. And through her efforts, she wrote a paper or for like and got some kind of internship because writing about her volunteer experience, and she was 14 people, 14 at the time, right? But because she was committed, she saw the responsibility. I've signed off on all of her volunteer credit hours, right? You find those rock star gems, right? That you're just like, oh my gosh, that typically you would think a 14-year-old can maybe take tickets, but she stepped up. So don't discount the minors, right? Do not discount the minor volunteers. You of course, have to have like a parental permission form signed, right, from them because you need parental permission for, your minors to be on site. Especially there has to be some kind of like parental supervision, but the leads are there as well. And that keeps everyone organized. Um, but for our Smithsonian event, like if they are under the age of 17, they have to have a parent or guardian on site at times. That also helps keep, some accountability there. But I hope that answers your question. Was that the full question, Maddie, or was there a second part to that?
That was the full question. We do have another question. So do you think a small festival needs applications for volunteers?
Ooh. I think it depends on um how small, what your event is accomplishing here, like what the theme is, and does it help you with organization? First,
Mm-hmm.
I like applications. even if it's just to gather information, right? It helps you organize, it helps with outreach efforts going forward, so you know who your past volunteers were, right? You're taking down your, everything from like name, address, if you want to mail things out afterwards. You've got, you're able to keep track of how many years they've been with you. They could talk about past volunteer experiences. They could talk about, hey, I'm available these specific dates, but not this date. And it helps you with navigating how many people, right? You're able to kind of collect data from this, right? How many people are coming, where your outreach is hitting. Again, how many years they have been with you. If they have past volunteer experience, which you may not get from people just coming in, right? So having just like a basic questionnaire, it doesn't have to be fully detailed, but with us, with like a larger organization, we ask for like resumes, or, if they're, if, there's something specific, like volunteer, like photography or documentation, they have to include a portfolio because again, this is the Smithsonian, things like that. But that way we also know, like if someone is offering to be, a photographer, we can look at their work sample, right? And choose the ones that are going to be best. So even a smaller event, I mean, even just a basic questionnaire is helpful. Because again, you're able to keep records and you're able to then call people like, hey, we didn't see you this year. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. Something simple, you could do something on like, Google Forms or whatnot that gets emailed out. So you don't have to have it, built out. But even just having some kind of link on like a website or something is, people can fill out, an application on, or a questionnaire. It depends on the scale of your event, right? But I would say yes, just for like an organizational standpoint, because you have enough going on with planning the event without also trying to keep track of all personal information for your volunteers. And so being able to just have all that in one spot is super helpful, especially if you have a staff member who might have all this information in their head, but then they retire or they move on to a new opportunity, and then you have someone new coming in from scratch. You're able to have those records, right, for who volunteers are. And also it might help, let's say you've had a volunteer that was unfortunately a really bad experience, right? And it's someone that you would not invite back to volunteer. You're able to keep record of that as well. But yeah, I would say yes, personally, but again, that's up to, the scale of your event. But just for a record standpoint, yeah. All right, anything else? All right. Volunteer organizational conflicts, how to avoid an angry volunteer, right? Sometimes that happens, right? Especially if you do have a larger event, or perhaps it is a smaller event, right? Where people are so personally invested because they are part of that community, right? And they are so invested. How do you avoid that? Clear communication, right? Don't discount your volunteers when it comes to decision making, right? You have to clearly stipulate why something is changing, or why an event date has changed, or why you're not offering this specific thing this year. Again, people are dedicated, to something that they have, given their time for, and they want to understand what is happening, right? Asking for inclusivity, asking for input. This year, one of our volunteer opportunities, which we asked for volunteer surveys. So we literally had volunteers going out, surveying the public, but we also had our intern this year who went out and surveyed the volunteers and their experiences and how things could go forward, right? A lot of times your volunteers, they are in the trenches, right? They are able to kind of see some of perhaps the miscommunication or those small issues that could be improved going forward. You as a staff are looking from a large lens, right, as the event of a whole. But the volunteers have that narrower lens where they're able to really dig in and see things from a different viewpoint that you may not recognize. And so being able to ask for their input helps avoid tension, because, sometimes it might be murmuring going, I don't know why they're doing it this way, or why this has been going on, or why they haven't thought of that. And maybe it's because you just didn't think of it, right? So asking for volunteer input is so huge, right? So surveying them. How was the event this year? How did this work for you? Did you have any problems or issues that rose up, right? So we developed a volunteer survey and an event survey as we were going around and surveying the event guests that were coming in as well. And so being able to have those two perspectives helps you going forward when it comes to planning and working out those kinks. And again, you have people like Jane who have been with us 16, 18 years, whatever it was, right? Or people, volunteers have been with us for 36 years. They have a lot of insight that you as perhaps a new staff member would not. They could say, oh, actually, we tried that in 1975 and that didn't work very well at the time. Perhaps if you change this, it would, right? They're able to really provide you with that history, right, of your event. Or perhaps if your event is a newer one, right? Again, more minds, right, offers more ideas, right? Many hands make light work, right? And so while you might be looking at things from, your staff perspective, right? The volunteer perspective is so critical to help things run smoother. And that goes down to transparency, right? If you are making changes or something has fallen through, be transparent as to why. And it doesn't hurt to tell your volunteers, you know what, we ran out of funding. It's as simple as that. We did not have enough to have that go through. Or you know what, we were going to have this artist come in, but they had, a sickness in the family or it didn't work for their schedule and we just weren't able to book them this year, right? Transparency, it helps because that's also your volunteers are part of your network and their outreach. And they might say, oh, we ran out of funding. Have you thought about contacting this organization who offers donations, right? Again, you're able to help branch out your network, which really just helps things, again, come up with solutions you might not have thought of, right? being compassionate, being compassionate with your volunteers. Perhaps, they haven't shown up and perhaps they were embarrassed by it, or perhaps they weren't able to commit something, right? Or they might, feel like, that staff has not been treating them well, right? And whether or not that is your perspective, that is their perspective, right? So being able to sit down and have an honest conversation with somebody, we had a volunteer that showed up this past summer that she felt there was miscommunication. She felt that she wasn't being given, the respect that she had deserved. It was a simple thing of lost in translation a little bit, right? Where she showed up and she thought she was doing one thing. We had her down for another. It was just misorganization a little bit. We're not sure where it happened, but we sat like, we are so sorry that this happened. We're so sorry that you were frustrated. I understand how frustrating that is. You have taken the time to take an hour metro down to the National Mall to show up. I'm sorry that you're hot. Here's some water. Sit down, take a break. We brought in another staff member that was overseeing the area that she wanted to volunteer in. We got her signed up and she was happy at the end. It just takes sitting down, having an open communication, and just being, I am so sorry. And then thanking them, right? For their time, for their efforts, right? Whatever type of recognition you're giving your volunteers, always, always, always saying thank you for a job well done, no matter how long their shift was, no matter what they were doing, and thanking them by name. I'm going to point that out. Thanking them by name, right? Get to know your volunteers, right? And just it helps them feel seen. It helps them feel heard. It helps them feel respected. They don't get angry, especially after, whatever kerfuffle happened, and you're able to part ways, right, on a good note, and hopefully they come back, right? We have had volunteers of all ages, of all backgrounds, right, of all cultures, of all languages, of all experience levels, and we really haven't had a whole lot of angry volunteers that have come in. There's always, one or two little instances that pop up, but for the most part, volunteers are excited because they feel respected. Because again, we call people by name, we offer orientations and trainings, we're offering, the ability to be with people they're partnered up with, to be in the areas they want to be in, they're receiving food and snacks and things like that, and it's just a fun time. And, this past year, as people were showing up, remember people, right? You're able like, I'm so glad you signed up again this year, so and so, thank you so much for coming back, right? And that helps them feel that connection on a personal level. So whatever issues do pop up, they feel comfortable coming and talking to you about it before it boils up to a breaking point. Yeah. Any questions on that? Jane, Maddie, you guys seen any questions there? Perfect. Okay. Values. Okay. Values as a as an organization. We are running out of time here. We're going to speed up a little bit here. So what are your organization events and values, right? What is it that you were trying to put out? So what is your purpose? Why are you planning this event, right? Who are you trying to reach through this? That boils down to the type of volunteers that you are going to get, right? And where your outreach should be happening. So organization, event, and value. So you really need to think about this. What do you stand for? What are you trying to accomplish, right? And who is your target audience for the event itself? And which may be different from volunteers, but really shouldn't be. It should be the same pool, right? So bringing people in that match that value set. And that is going to tie into our little chart here, right? So we have low effort roles of volunteers and high effort roles of volunteers, meaningful roles and maybe not so meaningful roles. So where are your your volunteers falling in, right? This is our sorry, this is where we should be falling. A volunteer a volunteer role should be pretty low effort, nothing massive, but meaningful for them, right? And that's where you're going to get a lot of people that are going to come in, right? They're going to want to do something really meaningful to them that doesn't require a lot of effort, right? This is where you don't want, right? You don't want volunteers feeling taken advantage of, where it's a high effort opportunity that does not have a lot of meaning, right? That's when they're not going to come back. If they feel that they have been used and abused a little bit, right? They feel that they really didn't get anything out of it, and they just absolutely hated it. It was hot, it was uncomfortable. This is where micro volunteer roles kind of fall in a little bit, right? Something that is a little bit like again, tickets or things like that, right? It's low effort. That's where a lot of those micro roles fall. We're going to get a lot of shifts, right? But your repeat volunteers are going to really come back for if it's a low effort but meaningful. But then the values, they kind of fall in here. Something that you have specific roles for people that are meaningful and have a little bit of a higher effort. And that's where your lead volunteers fall in as well, right? Those who they do have to put in a lot of energy and a lot of time, but it's meaningful for them. That's why they come back. We're gonna move on here as we get through a few more slides. Again, yeah, so everything ties back to your values, right? So who has similar values, right? This is where your outreach is going to start to happen. What other organizations have similar values as yours, right? And who in there are you able to contact, right? So this might be like community interest groups, right? Such as like neighborhood groups, like neighborhood gardening groups or neighborhood cooking groups or whatnot. Clubs at schools, at universities, right? Other nonprofits, other businesses. And I'm going to point out here that everyone in this session, right? You all kind of put out, right, who you are or where you're from. You should be contacting each other a little bit, right? Especially if you're in the same area, to help advertise each other's opportunities to reach a broader group, right? That's where you're able to really tie in and find volunteers in your area that are interested in. So what we've done every year as we are organizing our volunteers, right, is we start with the staff collaboration, those who are actually planning the festival, right? So we kind of define their need, right? What, they're able to kind of group volunteer opportunities into groups and subgroups, talk about shifts that need to happen and the number of people your staff need to fill in these opportunities. So collaborating with them on what needs to be done, how many people they really need, every day, for every opportunity, and you're able to then to break that up into shifts. Okay, I've got this tent that's going to need 3 people all day long, right? You might want to break that up into shifts, right? So you have 1 or 2 people per shift that are in there, because you really want to kind of over plan, right? You really want to try to reach for a few extra people than to have too few people. So if they only need 3 people and you advertise out for 4 people, right? Like, okay, 2 people per shift for the day, right? That way it's always staffed. So there we create our volunteer opportunity groups that go out online, right? We're able to say, okay, we need somebody in what we call foodways, the kitchen, right? We have 2 shifts, we need 4 people per shift, right? And that's when applications start to come in, right? Or perhaps it's information booth, right? Like, okay, we need to make sure there's at least 3 people there all day long. So we're going to create 2 or 3 shifts depending on the day. And then we're able to, again, have applications come in and fit people in where they're able to. And that's when our lead volunteers come in. Every group or area or opportunity for our festival has a lead volunteer that manages all those volunteers in that area, right? So with our festival, like we had 2 kind of curated plots, right? Typically, right? Like here's like, so I guess I would say 2023's event, we had the Ozarks and we had Creative Encounters, right? So there was a lead opportunity over both of those areas. Then we had a lead volunteer over both of those areas. Then we had a lead volunteer over the information booth. We had a lead volunteer over participant hospitality to help take care of all of our special artists and guest speakers that would come in. We had a lead volunteer over foodways, kitchen areas, right? That way they're kind of managing those volunteers in that area while you're seeing to bigger things, right? Like, trying to put out fires here and there as the event goes on. For our lead volunteers, they get paid a stipend because they're there all day, every day, right? So they are kind of considered staff, right? They are lead volunteers. So they come in for the season and they receive special training beforehand. And we're going to go into that a little bit here. But as you are getting volunteers in and planning your events, you really need to think about accessibility for all of your volunteers that come in. And there's going to be a future session that really dives into this with our accessibility team. They are amazing. Listen to everything they say. But everyone of all ages and backgrounds can have different accessibility needs, right? And they should be allowed, they should be able to come in and volunteer in any role that they feel comfortable, right? Such as allowing guide dogs, right? We make sure that our accessibility team goes in and sets up specific chairs, right, that are saved for those people maybe who have wheelchair access or to be closer to sit where there is like an ASL interpreter that can see, right? We made sure that there's either earplugs or headphones for louder environments, pairing people up. Anyway, accommodations need to be made, especially even for your volunteers, to make sure they feel welcome and respected on site. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because our accessibility team will with a future session, but they're brilliant, and our accessibility coordinator has been doing this for I don't know how many years with the Smithsonian. But that's also including inclusive and respectful language. So when you're talking about this and talking with people, you're not using offensive terms such as like handicapped or special needs, right? But using first person language, we say, where a person requesting a wheelchair is at the accessibility tent. Can somebody bring one over? You don't need to say a handicapped person bring them. That's not how this works, right? A person requesting a wheelchair. Person first language, right? And we never assume that people can move, communicate, process. We assume that everyone can move, communicate, process, and engage in a number of ways, right? So making sure that you are working with people that understand this is incredibly helpful, and that your volunteers are being trained in this as well. Making sure that they are understanding this. That is always part of our training that we offer our volunteers. And I'm sure our accessibility coordinators will be able to share this with their session. Like I said, they're brilliant. Because we are only having about 30 minutes left, we'll make sure we get to our Q&A. I'm going to go through these next bits a little bit. So outreach, right? So how to outreach to people. So some things to keep in mind as we've talked about, right? What are your outreach goals, right? And so what are you trying to increase, first-time volunteers or encourage repeats, right? You want people of all ages, perhaps, right? So again, what we do is we offer a lot of incentives, right? Such as for our minors, right? Service learning hours for school credit. Or perhaps again, it's also we just offer t-shirts, right? We also sign off on community work hour, community service hours for like the counties that people are working in, right? And tying back to our values and our goals, reaching out to places with same values and goals as your organization. So checking out websites, checking out community groups, talking with staff, right? Having social media posts, hashtags that is helpful, right? As you're engaging with people, reaching out to other um, like community service type websites. Like I know there's so many different volunteer websites out there where you can post about your opportunity, right? Reaching out to perhaps again, we've said like universities and schools. We reach out to like community coordinators at different cities. We're literally cold calling people or cold emailing people, churches, right? Different youth group areas. Like we do all the research ahead of time, and we just have a spreadsheet literally of names, phone numbers, emails, and the people that we're able to contact through them, and building those relationships, introducing yourself, having just a brief introduction to what you're looking for, not getting too long-winded, right? Because people aren't going to read through a long email, but just, are you able to share our flyer with your organizational membership, right? Sometimes you might be asked to create like some little free account on some other website platform. That's fine. We do things like handshake with universities or whatever. Um, some school counties will allow you to share, some won't. It really depends. But that's when you engage with family and friends who work with different areas as well to start making those connections and those networks. Maddie, just let me know if any questions pop up in the chat here. All right, lead volunteer.
Really, sorry, really quick question. So what are the most effective incentives for young volunteers versus older volunteers?
That's a great question. I've never really thought about that one. Um, for our youth volunteers, again, I do offer the student service learning credit hours, and most schools do have that. I know here in our area, in Northern Virginia, it's actually required for graduation that students have a certain number of volunteer hours. So we really hype that up. But we also we offer t-shirts, and we tell them, like, hey, there's free ice cream. You're able to see the events after your shift ends, and we really kind of like, I started going into the schools, and I started giving presentations to their clubs, and talking to the students themselves and really hyping it up, and so we show, some video or photos from past events and get them interested. And so when you're going and doing presentations at schools, right, you're able to pick out clubs that have like a similar theme or interest to what your event theme is. Kind of finding that overlap a little bit. Girl Scout and Boy Scouts, they will come in, but also just saying, bring a friend with you. It's so exciting, right? And we got concerts and there's dance and you get food samples, and you're able to be able to go out and you're seeing all these great cultural communities or these artists that come in, right? And you really, if you're enthusiastic, they start to get enthusiastic, because as an older person, they may like, hey, you don't know what's cool or whatever, right? But when you start showing them, right, and talking about things, and we start bringing in language like, and we really encourage you to share the photos you take of your event on your social media pages, and they're like, oh, okay, that's exciting, right? And then you could use like the hashtag or whatever. And anyway, the youth start to get interested in this, because it is something that they can do, and it's unique, and they're able to share their perspective. Whereas like the older volunteers typically are more interested in the actual educational process of it. They're fascinated by what is being shared every year. They like to network, they like to get out and talk, right? And be able to meet people. So again, if you have, like some artist coming in that is doing, like wood carving, birds or something, then you go to like birding groups to do outreach, right? And you're able to find people in those clubs that will come volunteer for you because they have an interest in it, right? And so finding that those kind of interest-based um uh people that's where your volunteer pool comes from. So it might change year after year a little bit, right? But then they might enjoy it and they'll come back next year, whether they're interested in that specific topic or not, but just because they had a good experience, they felt respected. And that's as your volunteer pool grows and grows. By doing this last year, we took our event from maybe 200 volunteers the previous year up to over 500 this past summer. We have more than doubled our volunteer pool by finding those interest groups, by going and doing in-person presentations, right? By just having, that bit of networking, right? And it's like, make sure you tell your friends, right? And it's going to be really amazing. And they start getting into it, right? And so being able to do that, you grow your, I guess, your volunteer pool. And that helps. And they may not come back every year, right? But at least you know that your numbers are growing. So lead volunteer and volunteer management here. As Jane mentioned, and you're going to get a lot more training on this with future sessions, but we offer like site and safety training, emergency response training, right? Accessibility training, minor safety, right? Cultural training, because this past year with Indigenous Voices, we made sure that we made training pamphlets for all volunteers and staff, right, about appropriate language to use and not to stereotype and things like that, to make sure that everyone is involved, right? You're going to get medical training, sustainability training, meaning like, again, your trash and recycling, as our event is large scale, we're proud that we've reached up to was like 94% recycling, right? And reusing, so to prevent a lot of waste. So what we've done is with our lead volunteers, we offer lead volunteer orientations that go through all of this in detail, right? And then we also do general volunteer training. So two separate trainings where the leads come in as well, and all your general volunteer pool, who then they break out with staff and the leads and they go toward the event site, right? And they receive specific training from the leads and the actual staff members about any detail specific things they need to know, right? But we also talk to them about working with the public, right? Or especially like the media come in, right? You need to be able to know how to handle that. But also, as Jane has mentioned, we go into incredible detail about self-care, making sure that, they're staying hydrated. They're taking breaks if they're feeling overheated, right? Or if they just like, hey, do you mind if I go watch this quick session or go chat with this artist real fast, right? Making sure, again, they've got their shifts happening, right? That they're, again, that they received their t-shirt, right? Or had they had their bathroom break or go get lunch at this time, right? The lead volunteer oversees all of that with the general volunteer group, right? But self-care is so important. And by encouraging that, sometimes if a volunteer doesn't show up, they will contact you ahead of time to say, I'm not feeling well this morning. I can't come to my shift, right? By letting them know that you care about them as a person, and whether this is through email outreach or whatever it is, like we're constantly emailing our volunteers ahead of time. And remember, if you're feeling sick, or if you're not feeling well, make sure you let us know as much as soon as possible ahead of time so we can fill your role. But we want everyone to be healthy and happy and safe. So, all right. So, okay.
Quick question. So we have, should board members be expected to volunteer a certain amount of hours or certain number of hours?
Oh gosh, I think it depends on your event. Yeah. That's a really good question. I think it should be encouraged. Can it be forced? Not really, right? But it should be highly, highly, highly encouraged. And as a board member, honestly, they should want to come and volunteer for the event, right? If they're dedicated to the event, they should want to come to the event. But what do you guys think, Jane? I mean, have you seen board members come into events or other staff that have come in for volunteer roles with the Smithsonian?
Um, I've met some of them. I don't know if they're volunteering, but they sure like to enjoy the performances and walk around the festival site. And I mean, they're there participating, but I'm not sure they'd be volunteering.
Yeah. I have had some events like, so when I was doing, all right, so I worked at the International School of Kenya for a while, and we had a lot of cultural events. And some of our school board members were there. In fact, it was like expected that they would come volunteer at the events, right? I know that's different than like a board member of a nonprofit. Um, but honestly, yeah, they will come watch the events, but they should be encouraged to volunteer, right? They really should be. And again, that's something that you can't like put out in an email to your board that you are expected to fill this number of volunteer hours. However, you could encourage the board members, and we encourage you to come in and volunteer so you get a hands-on experience. You can frame it in a way that's super positive, right? That really helps them to engage more. Um, and I realize I kind of ran through these panel discussions super fast, but we do have a few minutes here before we end to do some more Q&A and to talk about these points and more these panel discussion topics in more detail. And so what I'm really wanting to dive into here with this lead volunteer is really hear from Jane's perspective with your experience, Jane, working through 16 years of events, leading volunteers, right? And some of your volunteer management. And we'll go through some of all of these questions that pop up here in the chat. So, Jane, with some of the trainings you have received, right, what have you found to be the most helpful?
The orientations are very good, I've found. And then when we have our specific orientation with the people that I'll be working with, let's say I've got 8, 10 people. Some of them have volunteered before, some haven't. So I try and pair an experienced person with someone new so they don't feel like they're abandoned. And I let them decide who goes on a break. That's between them. They can work it out who goes to lunch when and who takes a break when. I tell them I'm going to lunch at noon. You two, work it out among yourselves when you want to, because our booths have to be manned at all times. Like I said earlier, I give them my cell phone in case they want to talk to me uh, uh, after hours or if they're going to be late, that sort of thing. I make sure that they know the layout of the festival so that they can tell people where things are.
So maps, we always have a
Yes,
map of where things are that every volunteer, right? Yeah.
right. And one thing I wanted to say about volunteering, friends of mine encourage their teenagers to volunteer because it looks really good on a resume when it comes time for them to apply for a part-time job or a summer job or something like that. It looks really good to say, last summer I worked at the Smithsonian for a day or a week or whatever it was. And the young people, I mean, they're so excited. They only have to work for 4 hours. They get an ice cream and a t-shirt and they're thrilled to death. And at the end of the day, I think they're great. And I thank them for coming, and maybe, some of them come back again, and then they also make they're strangers and yet they network, and I think they become friends afterwards. So that's kind of cool to see that. Um, what
And
else?
my daughter, who was 11 or 12 at the time, was volunteering, and she met another girl at the festival event. We found out lived just like 4 roads over from us that she had never met before, and they became friends, and they're friends to this day. So you're able to find these really neat connections. She met a neighbor down on the National Mall, right? I mean, how right? You lifelong friendships. And we see that with our volunteers who come back. I'm so excited to see you this year, right? Because they know that so-and-so is going to be there manning that booth or that station, right? And that's kind of become part of the culture and tradition of the festival itself, right? Yeah.
I think some of the volunteers are nervous that, oh, I don't know enough about this particular topic, but it really doesn't matter because we're all learning. And by the end of the day, you've learned more about the theme or in our case, the artists or the performers. And yeah, I think I used to worry about that. Oh, I don't know enough about this particular country or this region or anything. But you accumulate knowledge and you share knowledge with the people you're working with. So that's I find that fascinating.
Very true. Why don't we go ahead? We just have a few minutes left, and I'm sorry this went a little long. Q&A. If anyone has any specific questions, feel free to unmute yourself. And we've got a few minutes left. And if I'm not sure if we're able to go a few minutes over, Lori, but yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, or if we have any questions in the chat here. Any questions coming in, Maddie?
There have been a couple. I've been answering them in the chat.
Great. Well, let's see. Let's see. Some of I think our favorite experiences, when it comes to working with our volunteers, this past year, we kind of had some concern come up with some of our long-term volunteers, right? That they wanted to come back, but they weren't sure they could physically be out in the heat that long. So we tried to get creative, right? Here we were looking to outreach and increase volunteers. We had some volunteers who wanted to come back but weren't sure they were able to. And so we decided to be creative and come up with a solution that would meet both of these topics head on, right? Where we create a new opportunity volunteer role, which we called festival historians, right? And we place them in an air-conditioned area. And if you don't have access to an air-conditioned area, perhaps you get a tent with a bunch of fans in it or whatever to keep people cool. But it allowed them to sit and be in a role where we just had the sign up that says, ask a festival historian, right? And they were able to share their stories, share their experiences, this accumulated institutional knowledge of, our volunteers have been there for a long, long time, right? And by talking about it and talking about why they coming back to volunteer, they engaged with a lot of festival guests who came up and asked questions, and they were able to learn more about volunteering, and that got them interested. And we literally had people come up to our volunteer area to talk about like, how do I volunteer next year, right? So we were able to kind of find that dual solution, where again, our volunteers felt respected. It wasn't, sorry, you're not able to come back this year. No, we found a role for them, right? So being able to continue that, to find creative solutions for roles to help people feel that they are valued is incredibly, incredibly important. And it helped with our outreach as well, right? And so finding those opportunities really go a long way. Do we have any questions that we have not answered yet, Maddie, that are in the chat here?
Really quickly, I'm going to jump in and share one little screen just in case any of our folks have to pop off. I know we're getting close to the end here.
Yeah.
So for all of my folks, I just wanted to remind you what we have coming up. The next few weeks, we have canceling and postponing session, as well as one that I'm super excited for. It's called The Magic Behind the Scenes. It's all about logistics and layouts for your festival. And then if you don't mind, if everyone will just take your phones out super quickly and scan this QR code, we'd love for you to evaluate session 3. So if you will just do that really quickly, that would be awesome.